We're here. We're in the Facebook group. All right, so we're going to check YouTube real quick, see how it's going over there. Top search. Oh, we got a few hundred more subscribers today. Oh, it's not showing us. All right, let me check one thing real quick, and then we're going to get into the official discussion. Sorry, everyone that's already on here. You know, the live and doing the multi-stream means sometimes everything isn't as fluid as we would like it to be. Oh, my computer is going to go slow, isn't it? We'll leave that alone. We'll try later. If somebody can see us on the YouTube side, can you leave a comment? I want to make sure that we're up. But it's not showing. So kind of coming in from YouTube. Okay, YouTube's coming in. All right, sorry guys. Thank y'all so much. It's just a lag, and the software we use is like really cumbersome on my laptop, so it's kind of hard to check multiple things. But let's get right into this discussion because I am super excited. Let us know if you can hear everyone properly, but we have the distinguished professor, Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, here to discuss our first complex theory. Author chat. It's not our first complex theory read. Our first complex theory read was A Voice from the South by Dr. Cooper. But we are doing Black Feminist Thought. We read 4 chapters of her. Is seminal the right word? Is just very pivotal. Like, this is a very influential book. And I think your first edition was written in 1994, correct?
1990.
Oh, 1990. You know, there are whole adults.
This is a serious classic.
You know, yes, this is a very classic read. You also wrote Black Sexual Politics, which was one of the first books that I read by you. So we are very, very appreciative to have you join us. And, you know, the theme of the SBG Book Club is to make reading accessible to a broader audience. I know there have been some accusations that reading or telling people to read is an elitist train of thought, and we wanted to really remove the elitism from reading and really encourage everyone to engage with us across the spectrum of Black critical theory. And so we really appreciate you being here with us. Thank you.
It's good to be here.
All right, and you are still teaching at University of Maryland.
No, I am not.
You're not teaching?
I'm an emeritus professor.
Okay.
Which means that I have time to actually read things again and think about things again. So I'm very happy I'm not teaching, but I am still affiliated with both the University of Maryland and with the University of Cincinnati.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you for giving us your time. Let me go up to numbers. So we're just going to get right into the questions because we received over 80 questions and we condensed them down to about 25 questions. We tried to get in everyone's themes generally asked across the questions. Yeah. And it's still going to be a lot. So let's just dig right in. All right, so to start, in the preface of Black Feminist Thought, you write, in order to demonstrate the existence and authenticity of Black Feminist Thought, I present it as being coherent and basically complete. I present Black Feminist Thought as overly coherent, but I do so because I suspect this approach is most appropriate for this historical moment. Yeah. I hope to see other volumes emerge which will be more willing to present Black Feminist Thought as a shifting mosaic of competing ideas and interests. So the question being asked based on this is, did the intention to present Black feminism as fixed influence a preface for thought, preference? I'm sorry, I have braces, so sometimes I just trip over myself and say.
Okay, it's a calm down.
Yes.
Breath.
Did the intention to present Black feminism as fixed influence a preference for thought in the title of thinking? So in comparison to thinking was thought, yeah. The preference. And if so, what is the benefit of marking the difference in our feminism? And if not, how might we continually decipher the nuance of language in our feminism?
I think it's important to remember the conditions under which I wrote Black Feminist Thought. I researched and wrote this book in the 1980s. And this was a period of time when many people did not think that Black women had
Oh, hold on one second. I
Black
think
women's thought and ideas. And I had to figure out a way to position this book so that I could get it published and so that I could legitimate the work that was out there. Is everything all right? Should I keep going? Okay, all right, I'll keep going. So, really, what I really wanted to do was actually what I have actually been able to do over a 30-year career, which is intervene in the academy and its notion of theory. Because theory was something that white men, elite white men did, and that's who controlled theory. And what I saw was a form of feminist theory by white women that was taking a similar posture of controlling theory. So I had to think about this particular project in selecting my vocabulary so that I could create a foundation that I could stand on and then develop over time. And that at the same time would enable people who were coming behind me to stand on that same foundation. Now, when you're organizing, if you know anything about community organizing, you have to present a united front. It's something called solidarity. You have to pretend, or at least assume, you are more united than you are divided, because if you start off in the space of saying we're divided and we're arguing and we compete and we have all these ideas, you do not move forward, because the people who want to keep you down use that particular dissent to discredit you. Now, that was the climate in which I was writing, and I was also writing from a very junior position. This is work that I was interested in graduate school, but did not pursue then. This was work that I was pursuing as an assistant professor in Africana Studies at the University of Cincinnati. I had no tenure. I had to really think about my words very carefully. So not only did I have to think about the word Black, I had to think about the word feminist, why I would choose that word over something else, because that word was going to help get these ideas out. I was less concerned with calling it Black Feminist Thought than I was in selecting the language that would not violate the ideas in the book, but that would ensure that the book would get published, it would get out, and it would create a space for other people. So back to, you asked specifically about thought versus theory. I didn't want to claim theory too early, because by claiming theory early, what I would be saying to people is, theory is what the white guys do. And I wanted space to create new rules around what it means to do intellectual work if you are Black women or if you're working from a space that's similar. So it was quite intentional on my part. It was not accidental, and it was useful.
Yeah, and I think you really get to that in chapter 12, or maybe it's chapter 11. We read chapter 11 and 12 first, and then we went back to chapter 1 and 2. And so I distinctly remember you breaking down how even when we get into the academy, theorizing the same way the white men have, who are, theorizing from their own perspective and who don't have the lived experience of Black women.
But I do want to point out, though, that the 2000 edition is a revised edition. So what I did was I wrote a 1990 edition where that was a question of getting in the first place. And by 2000, I could begin to look at those nuances that I knew were there all along, but couldn't say much about within the first edition. So by the second edition, I was attempting to deal with, because one of the questions you asked me had to do with the critiques that actually shaped my thinking about the first book. And the critiques were not just intellectual critiques, they were also political critiques. How had the landscape of the US changed from 1990 to 2000? And how did that affect how I was writing? So making that argument more explicit by 2000 was something I could do. If I'd made it that explicit in 1990, I would have been a target. And I was a target anyhow, but I would have been a bigger target.
Okay, someone's saying they can't hear me, but I can hear me, so everything is on. You can hear me. But let's move into the next question, which is still about the writing process, even though you kind of got ahead of us with the...
I'm kind of a holistic thinker. So
Oh
what
no,
I'll do
we'll
is
take
I'll
whatever
just
you
jump
have to give.
around. I
It's
love your
fine.
questions. So sometimes I'm going to want to jump to that, question down the road. We can get to it again. I'm
Yeah.
fine with it. All right.
Okay. So
Don't worry.
what
Cool.
obstacles during the beginning of your feminist journey led to your research and production of Black feminist thought? And was there a guide, mentor, or text that directed your journey?
I'm just going to answer this question honestly. I don't see it as a question of obstacles. I see it as a question of challenges. All right. What are the challenges that I face on any given day to do what I think is worth doing and important to do? So I tend to look at what I'm committed to. Now, what sustained me was a passion for justice and a love of Black people. It was that simple. And because Black people came in all flavors, they came in all genders, that was part of how I had to challenge myself in terms of what I was seeing. But it was more than just, I love Black people and let's all celebrate. It was a question of the society itself has hardwired social injustices built into it. So you have to be committed to something bigger and be convinced that your own work is important, not just to you, but to other people, especially if you're surrounded by people who often have no idea what you're talking about and, quite frankly, don't care. So I didn't see that as an obstacle. I saw that as a challenge. And that doesn't mean that I didn't have bad days and I wasn't sad and I went home and it's like, oh, this is so hard. I had those days, many of them. But the issue is I've always viewed intellectual work as political work. It's creating space with ideas for the people who come behind us and who make life easier for the people who we love. So if you look at it that way, how do you not get up and do this work? All of the women, where I grew up who got up and went to these jobs they did not want to go to, right? They were underemployed, they were underpaid, but they got up and did it anyhow. We can respect that for work for money. But we have to learn to respect that for ideas, for thinking work. If you're going to get out there and put forth arguments that have never been made and defend them, that's really worth it. So that's how I saw it. And that's a long game. That's not a short game. That's not something somebody takes away from you in a faculty meeting on Tuesday and they hurt your feelings and you go, oh, poor me. Oh, my God, they don't see how brilliant I am. Later. This is a long game situation that we are all in. And I can talk this way about it because on the front end of my career, I didn't see it that way. It was more feeling my way. This seemed to make sense. On this end of my career, I can definitely see it as a long game because I can see the strategies that I have pursued over 30 years and longer and how they work and why they work and how we have to be kind to people who may be at the beginning of their learning process and who may be going off in directions that are problematic. For example, all those Black women that say, I'm against Black feminism. I want to say you're against yourself. This is a fascinating thing, all right? Or, anyhow, I want to come back to that issue, or I can just pursue that now for a bit more if you'd like. I want to pursue that because I love it. This is my story.
Okay, tell us your story.
Please tell us how I wrote this book. I wrote this book in dialogue with my students in Black Studies at the University of Cincinnati, which is a regional university. They weren't all Black students in my classes, but there were a large percentage were Black students. And I planned this class it was called Contemporary Black Women, because we couldn't even say Black feminism. See, people are afraid of the word. Oh, feminism, ooh, it's an evil word, ooh, kind of thing, all right? So I didn't even say that. I called the class Contemporary Black Women. And if you read Black Feminist Thought, the book that everybody has read or will read the rest of it, you'll see that each of those chapters was tied to my syllabus. That's where they came from, all right? A lot of them. Chapter on motherhood, chapter on work, chapter on family, chapter on politics, chapter on images, These were all things that my students cared about. And these were all things that I thought should be at the heart of Black feminism. But I didn't tell them that. The last session was called Black Feminism. And they were ready for me. We took the whole class. Week 1, they were with me. I said, you like this idea? They said, yeah, we love this idea, Dr. Collins. Week 2, how are we doing on week 2? This is us. We really are against this racism and this sexism in the labor market. Week 3, oh, we honor our mothers. We love our mothers. We love our grandmothers. We love our great-grandmothers. We can see. All right, they were with me the whole way through when it came to the ideas. But when we got to that last week, they were ready. We know we're going to hate this Black feminism, because they had a certain conception of what a Black feminist was, or a feminist was, that they had learned from mainstream media. All right? But they just decided they didn't realize that they hadn't thought about the term. When we got to the last week, I said, well, you like the whole class, right? You know, and they said, yes, we do. I said, you know, I hate to tell you this, but what we've done the entire time has been the main ideas of Black feminist thought as I understand it. And they said, Dr. Collins, you are so tricky. I said, well, this is not tricky. Over. You have to take this question with you. Why was I so resistant to these ideas without knowing what they were? Class is over. Move on. Now, that would be the process of doing this kind of work, taking complex ideas, making them accessible, working through dialogue. All of those things are very important. So
I really appreciate in this book your referencing and the importance you give to a dialogical approach. Because that's a theme of the book club has really taken on, and this is why we curate live discussions and we create the syllabi, because we really wanted to bring in the dialogue, because the books have always been there to read. And there's a reason why maybe people haven't been grasping onto the knowledge that the books provide. And, you know, as a pedagogy of the oppressed, right, part of the way people, especially in oppressed people, learn is through a dialogical education and not just saying, oh, this is how. You
really also have to push yourself. It's not just that everything's in the book and then the book is going to be, not my book, any book. The book is going to be an easy read and we're all going to be happy. People approach books often the way they approach media, the way they approach movies and television shows. It either goes down easy or not. They put a thumb up or they put a thumb down. Reading a book is a dialogue between you and the author, but the author is not in the room. And the meaning that comes out of that dialogue comes from the reader and from the book, whatever the book is. So it's always dialogical. If you claim yourself as a reader, your power to think on your own, without the book telling you what to think and telling you what to say. Sadly, that is what a lot of our educational system is designed to do. It's designed to keep us docile and passive and not have dialogues. Because very often dialogues are contentious. That's okay. Conflict is not bad, right? Conflict can get ideas on the table. But we've been taught to be docile and passive and follow orders and believe what people say. And this book, I wanted it to be read, but I also wanted to lay the foundation for the exact argument that I've just made to you now.
Yes. All right. Let's move along to the other questions because we can.
Let's just keep going. I mean, really, I would work with you, but you know, obviously, I love this material.
Yeah. No.
All right. I mean, I've been working with this material for a very long time. And I'm still passionate. That's what gets me going. I got excited when I discovered there was a whole nother wave of younger Black women who were picking up Black feminism and who were reworking the ideas and asking different questions and new questions. And I didn't find that in the US. I found it in Brazil. So for all of these women who are like anti-Black feminism, they need to get on a plane once COVID is over and go hang out with their sisters in Brazil, because they are amazing. And they are not shy about claiming these kinds of issues. They're not worried about the words.
Okay. So the next question is in the same frame of what we previously asked. I mean, I think you kind of covered this though, but is there a critique of Black feminist thought that you felt moved the framework in a direction you had not considered? I think this is question 3.
What was interesting in terms of the 90s was that was a period of time when mass incarceration and the policies of the Reagan administration went into place. So it really was a period of time of increased conservatism. And that was juxtaposed to, in the academy, moving away from structural analyses like mine. They didn't want to talk about racism as a big system. They didn't want to talk about sexism as a big system, or capitalism in terms of how it creates inequalities. It was a shift toward questions of identity, questions of subjectivity, questions of individuals. So it was a period of time when you had a political context that was moving toward individualism and was saying to the public, don't think about any big social issues or social problems. Those people caused those social problems themselves as individuals, you see. It was also a period of time when in the academy, the conditions shifted in terms of the tools that were available to us. Now that affected my book in two ways, politically and intellectually. Politically, there was a pretty big assault on the term Afrocentric. And a lot of that assault came from Black scholars who were fighting with one another about the meaning of Afrocentricity. Now, I understood Afrocentric as African-derived and influenced ideas and practices. And that, I think, is still to this day quite demonstrated quite forcefully in the African diaspora. There are connections. There are, philosophies. There's a lot there that's rich. Unfortunately, in the U.S., we had a strand of Afrocentrism that became very dogmatic and became patriarchal, all right, and became heterosexist. It was a real problem time for me. So I had to figure out how to reclaim that idea without using the term Afrocentricity the way it was used by them.
Oh, I think that's definitely still a problem in 2020, though.
Okay, well, it's still there.
Yeah, it's still here, very much so.
Just because you wrap yourself in African garb does not make you Afrocentric. I mean, it involves, you need serious study if you're going to know about the diaspora. You can't just run around like performing it. Okay, that's a whole other thing. We can come back to that. But one issue was that, and I had to find a way to retain the serious scholarship that I think needs to happen around studying this sense of loss that we have as Black people. So I wrote about that. In 2000, I said, I'm sorry, I can't use the word anymore the way I used to, but here's what I mean, all right? I have to clarify. The other thing that was interesting that happened in the 90s, one of your questions actually speaks to this, was criticism. Here's the issue. When Black women got out there and said, we're claiming Black feminism, we're claiming Black womanism, we're claiming Black power for us, we're claiming all those claims, that was incredibly threatening to a lot of people. And in fact, they were scared to confront you directly. So nobody would get in your face and say, I just don't like Black feminism, you know that, right? I mean, nobody would say that. They were too afraid. So what they had was a rearguard attack on Black feminism that came at the very rules that we use to legitimate our own intellectual work. This was the attack on standpoint epistemology. Somebody asked about that, all right? Because Black feminist thought is fundamentally saying Black women have agency. We can talk, we can think, we have a point of view. It's not just an opinion. We have been working on a collective body of knowledge and information and practices as long as we've been in this country. And there is a standpoint that is negotiated that comes from that. It's not finished, it's not done. It's addressing the existential questions that we have. Now, here was the criticism. Somebody asked me this when I was at the University of Michigan for a semester. Dr. Collins, how would you, I do this a lot, if this is all right with you. I'm sort of dramatic around this. This helps me this is how I work. All right. So she asked me, Dr. Collins, how would you respond to the criticism that Black feminist thought is essentialist? Now, this is the exact same criticism of when I say I had to present it as overly uniform. By the second edition, I'm responding to this criticism of essentialism, which is somehow you are not speaking for all Black women. Well, what about this Black woman? Well, what about that Black woman? It was the most amazing thing to have white people say to me that I was not taking into consideration all of the Black women. And I thought, you don't even know any Black women. I may be the only Black woman you know. And you have the nerve to ask me this? So you can see by the passion in my voice, I was pissed to the bone. And I had to figure out a way, excuse me, that's a bit colloquial, but I can put it in academic language if you like, because you've got this general and you've got this complex track. And what we have to be able to do is translate between the two. All right. So it's a little different than speaking French and then speaking Portuguese. This is sort of like knowing, how to take the same ideas and talk about them differently. But I had to think about this whole criticism of essentialism and what it meant, and why I was so annoyed by it, because it was a way of disempowering us. This was saying to Black women, we're not convinced that you have anything that is a collective body of knowledge and practices that you have created without us. All right. Now, the white feminists had a hard time with Black feminism. You would think they wouldn't. They figured, well, the Black women will come along and do feminism like we do, and then that will make our feminism much more credible. And that's not the way I approach it in Black Feminist Thought. I approach it as a body of knowledge, a standpoint, a point of view that is negotiated over a long period of time to deal with the challenges that face Black women since we arrived in this country. That's not anything that has to do with integrating a broader feminist movement or any other movement. So, I think the whole attack on the standpoint was the attack on the legitimacy to make that kind of argument. And I had a real issue with that, and I still do, because this is why epistemology is so important. Epistemology, big word, all right, but a really big word. Why you believe what you believe to be true, why it's convincing to you, why you believe it. Who told you it's true? How do you know it's true?
Well, I want to bring it back to the question, though, because the other part of it is, if you could write another edition with a new chapter, what would it explore? Maybe epistemology? I think you can get to that already.
No, I think what's happened is that I have taken many of the themes of Black feminism, and they run throughout the corpus of my work. I have, for example, one thing that we can talk about in a few minutes is this whole notion of, writing in the 1990s, I knew that there was a very compelling case that needed to be made about Black masculinity. Black feminism isn't just for Black women. It is a philosophy or discourse that talks about masculinity and femininity, Black masculinity, Black femininity, and beyond. And what we needed was a Black feminist analysis of Black masculinity. But in order to do that, it was really important to hear from Black men, all right, who weren't just saying, oh, we've been more downtrodden than Black women, and not get out of that frame entirely, but Black men who were really taking on masculinity, Black masculinity, analytically. So I had to wait before I could write that book. And that one came out in 2005. But that's something that I wanted in the first book that I couldn't get in the second edition. There were other things that I've developed in other books. I've taken different aspects of themes in Black feminism. For example, that's the first place I write about intersectionality. All right, that argument is right there. The whole notion that there are intersecting systems of power. You can't unpack racism and sexism and class exploitation. They're all there together. And we're living in that intersection as individuals, and we're living in that intersection as a group. So taking the term, this is Kimberly Crenshaw's term, and really working with her term to ask myself how that worked with Black feminist thought and Black feminism. I've been working with intersectionality for quite a good amount of time now. So this particular book, Black Feminist Thought, I'm in the process right now of, we were supposed to come out with a 30th anniversary edition. This is 2020, right? And instead of revising the book, I think it's really important that I contextualize the book for people with a preface that says the kinds of things we're talking about now, that give you a sense of where it came from, what I was thinking about, but also with an afterword that answers that exact question you asked me, all right? Where should we go? Where are we going? What's next? I think a very important place to go next is the internal dialogue among Black women in this country. You have nailed it in some of the questions that the audience has sent to you, because that's what they're asking. The time is now to really have that dialogical engagement among Black women in the U.S. And that's not done. We're the beginning of that. Another place to go that I think is very significant is we really have to now look at the African diaspora. We have to look at Black women in a global context, because what that will do is shed light on African American women's experiences. And we now have the tools and the communications technology to do that. It was very hard for me to get information 30 years ago. There was no internet, there was no email, none of that existed, all right? And the third thing is to really think about this social justice agenda, how ideas about Black feminism inform a broader social justice agenda with Latinx people in this country, with people of color in this country. But also, I can't begin to tell you how many people around the world are kind of like Black women, only we wouldn't think of them being like Black women. It's sort of the power. Being in a situation where you are on the bottom of a power structure creates certain behaviors and responses that are not particular to Black people, but are familiar to us. For example, meeting Romani women. I got a chance to meet Romani women at a conference. It was like I had found my sisters. It was that kind of thing. Or this year, I've just gotten back from Australia before COVID. I wanted to go, and because I'm trying to learn about Indigenous peoples and experiences. So I've just put a lot of time on that. And I wanted to learn about Aboriginal people in Australia. And lo and behold, I find such similarities to Black people. And I also find similarities in terms of responses, humor, fun, dancing, movement, the whole thing. The cultural responses to oppression are much more universal than we think of them as being. So, those are three things that I'd say, listen, here's a list, people. Go do it. I won't be able to do this. I'm doing other things, all right? But this is the kind of thing where Black feminist thought could just sparkle and shine with these types of dialogues. So that's what I would say.
I would love to chime in on what you're saying, but we've asked 3 questions and we 30 minutes in. I will say,
I'm going to keep it shorter now.
That is fine. I want to talk about Angela Davis, and she's constantly talking about the Black feminists, and even this PIC abolitionist movement is also inclusive of Indigenous and Palestinians, and
yes.
That we have to think of a broader spectrum of people and not just single ourselves in order for our struggle towards liberation to be meaningful and successful. But we're going to move on to question number 4. Because, girl, we might be here all day. We 4 in. Okay.
You don't know me, but I can do that. But we're not going to do that.
Okay. So we're going to pull it back to the book. So on page 13, which I believe... on page 13 of the second edition of Black Feminist Thought, you spoke of the confinement of African Americans to urban ghettos as that which helped to solidify distinctive ethos or character in Black civil society. So the question is, how do we continue to practice and define that distinctive ethos in the current state of society that relies on a more fluid cultural exchange? So we have social media, decline of young and older adults attending church, etc. How do we go about it?
I think it's really having a clear agenda for what came out of that. What came out of those communities that everybody knew everybody and everybody lived in it, you could see your common cause. It was really clear what was happening to the person down the street was happening to you. And having common cause and common experiences enabled people to craft common responses. That doesn't mean everybody agreed. That just meant that there was a process for that. Now, this would be the side of racial segregation. Racial segregation created the opportunity to do that kind of community organizing, right? We don't live in a situation of racial segregation to the same degree. We have much more class stratification. We have people living who knows where and who knows what they're doing, all right? So there's a scattered nature of it. But what we do have is we have the new communications technologies that allow us to think about building Black communities that are not just geographically located or not just located on the web, but are basically a hybrid version, right? Or a kind of virtual, what's the word I'm looking for? Never mind, I'm going to come back to that. A version of community that doesn't exist one place or the other exclusively. So I think the issue is asking the question, what are the common cause? What are the common experiences? How do we organize people to see that? And what kinds of agendas can come out of that? I see it as a community organizing issue, using community not as just a geographic location, but a community is something you have to continually build and construct because it's a word of power, a place of belonging. So you just don't have this individual out there thinking if she puts on whatever makeup, her life will be fixed kind of thing. So it's a task for you. You're going to have a nice long list by the end of this particular interview of things that the listeners should get busy on.
I hope somebody's taking notes for me.
I hope somebody is, because I'm going to come up with a very nice list for you. There is serious homework that's going to come out of this interview.
Okay. I'll wait for it.
You don't have to do all of it yourself. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we're going to, I think you did already touch on this, but we're going to come back to the question so people can see it on the screen.
Sure.
But the term standpoint.
I'm not cooperating, am I, about the screen? Oh, I forgot all about the screen. Okay.
Oh, no, you're fine. It shows up on our side, but.
All right, good.
Yes. We have it together for us to keep it up. So the term standpoint is used throughout Chapter 2. How is the term different from experience, and does this term relate to Second Wave Feminism's standpoint feminist theory?
Yeah, I sort of started talking about that a bit.
Yes.
An experience is something that you have as an individual, and you interpret that as an individual. A group experience is something that a group shares, but not everybody experiences racism or sexism the same way. It's a shared set of challenges. A standpoint is not just an opinion, and it certainly isn't an experience. It really is self-reflection and analysis about those experiences and about each other's experiences in order to develop an explanation, a theory, a perspective. But also, for me, a standpoint is something that is designed to inform behavior. There's this term called praxis that is the combination of theory and action. And to me, a standpoint, or a Black feminist standpoint, comes from this place of social action as a way of knowing. Our experiences are a way of knowing. Our experiences in our own bodies, our experiences with other people. So we don't take experience away. It doesn't stand for itself. We use it and we stand on it to give our ideas authority. But our ideas just can't be random. They have to be negotiated through dialogue. So I take it very seriously. Now, I think that can be, again, quite threatening to some theorists, because standard social theory is not grounded in any of that. It is all abstraction in someone's head. It is the solitary scholar who's doing the theoretical work. It's the person who's above the world and who's looking down on it or on the topics and then is deciding. A standpoint epistemology is working from the bottom up. So when I say social knowing, social action as a way of knowing, that to me is foundational to this particular philosophy. Now, I can't speak if it's really articulates with second. I'm not really within the feminist community, even though I'm associated with feminism, but I'm not really working within that community. So I don't know what the ins and outs of the controversies are in terms of what people are fighting about in that particular community. My work straddles multiple disciplines. So in some ways it's nice because I don't know everybody's dirty laundry and their fights and all of that. I'm really just looking at what is useful and important in the work that you're doing that can address this project that I've been looking at for a while: social justice, loving Black people. Very simple. And I'm not helping. And I'm not, you're doing really well. We're going to do it. Trust me, we're going to get everybody in there. You'd be surprised. We're going to be there.
I'm sorry, I gotta repeat my whole question. I was on mute, and this is why I stick to the script because I will forget to unmute myself.
Okay.
Y'all know how I do. I'm sorry, I mute it so there's no echo on their side. So I mute my
It's good. I get to
so,
hear advice.
yeah. So this is there's a lot of things that I have to go back and forth with. So let me go back to the question again. Okay, so for those of us in insider-outsider roles, especially in academia, how might we better support vulnerable Black women who may not occupy the same spaces, especially when it comes to validating their ways of knowing? Do you have examples of this in your own work?
I think my entire corpus of my work has been designed to create space for people who are more vulnerable than me to do intellectual work that will take them forward. And then they are in a position to help those who are more vulnerable than them. So I see this as an unbroken intellectual struggle of moving forward. Now, we tend to think of vulnerable people and then we go immediately to, people sleeping on the street and you see all the social problems. But there are vulnerable people in your own house and backyard. So for me, it is always easier. It's harder because emotionally it's harder. We can feel like we're doing such good work helping the starving children of Africa as vulnerable people. That's kind of the Western colonial mission. It is much harder in the context of your own everyday life to say, who are the vulnerable people and what is going to work? Now, I specialize in ideas. I think there are lots of ways that one can resist and help. And how I do it is through my writing. So my goal is everything I write, I know how it might speak to a certain readership, audience, and that audience may not be written to that audience. It may be written on behalf of that audience. But I also know that it should create space for those who come behind me, who can cite me, love it or hate it, whatever, but they will know that they're not the first ones or the only ones to think these things, and they can stand on what I do and pull others along. Now, that's how you develop an intellectual community. That's how you develop a Black feminist intellectual community of people who are serious about thinking about these ideas and who aren't just showing up on Tuesday because it's fashionable, and then Wednesday they go home because somebody else is in. That is how academia works. It's a big fashion show in terms of intellectual trends. So we're not going to do that. When you talk about vulnerable people, this is serious because what each one of us does trickles out to all of these other people in terms of the connections that we have. And we cannot save the world. I do not want to see another sister who describes herself as being an outsider within position. And it is upsetting when you know how bad the world is. But I see each person as a resource and it's using the talents that you have. So that is what I would say about the vulnerability issue. Right, for now. I may come back to that. I have other thoughts.
No, that's a soundbite. This will definitely be up on the Instagram later. Thank you for that. This hits on so many things that I am always talking about. So we love it, love it, love it. Okie dokie. So we're going to get into some of the core themes of Black feminist thought and some movements that are very popular on the social media space in 2020. All right, so let me see if this is the right question first. All right, yes. So, from the preface again, so the voice that I now seek is both individual and collective, personal and political, one reflecting the intersection of my unique biography with the larger meaning of my historical times. So the person who submitted this question is saying that they are stunned at the denial of interconnectedness voiced by some young, cisgender, heterosexual, and lesbian women that refuse Black trans women and femmes love, which I see as honor, visibility, space, and camaraderie, and feminism. So what specifically sparked a sense of relatedness in you? And how can we recenter and politicize genuine togetherness?
I think you just have to assume you're already together with people. And if they are not ready to deal with you, you just leave them alone till they are. I hate to say this, but sometimes the direct conflict approach doesn't help you, because there are other people who want to get to know you, who never do get to know you, because you've been fighting with the ones who reject you. So it's interesting if you think about the passage of time around these issues. The invisibility of Black trans people in the 90s and in the 80s, or even issues around sexuality within Black communities. My gosh, people were saying, you can sing in the choir, but just don't come out and tell us you're gay, but we'll love you anyhow, that kind of thing. The Black community and Black people have come a tremendous distance in a short amount of time. In fact, when I think about Black Lives Matter, helping to create a bigger space by saying, they got to go argue with the All Lives Matter people. All right, all lives matter. No, Black Lives Matter. But basically the framework, all Black Lives Matter, is fundamentally the internal dialogue among Black people that needs to happen. And it's going to take a while for that. I'm not saying to wait. I'm just saying that we have to really respect the process of how people really develop relationships and become committed. Because if I meet you on Tuesday and then I'm your buddy on Wednesday and I'm with you forever, my sister, I'm not convinced that you're going to be there on Thursday. So this is the whole notion of building relationships, and that takes time. And that involves seeing the humanity in every Black person. Like every Black person. And we've got a long history here because we have been exposed to a form of racism that has dehumanized us. So how can we turn around and say we're now fully human if we're heterosexual or we're whatever, but those other people aren't fully human, even though they're brown like us? It is a conceptual flaw. It is an ethical failure. It is wrong. But also, wagging your finger at somebody and telling them they're wrong is not the best way to build that relationship and have that dialogue, unless they are dangerous, in which case I would say something different. All right.
Now that's a good point. I think I'm constantly trying to remind myself to not get dragged into, beefing with individuals, especially other Black women. Because my ethos is, unless they're causing harm to a community, I try not to participate in, speaking down to other Black women. I try not to. Are we always successful?
It's like building a different argument. It's like hearing the arguments that people are making. Intellectual work can be really good at this. You really have to listen to people and say, what are the flaws in the argument? What are the assumptions that are there for that argument to be, to work? Like there's one I just gave you. So you're assuming that these other people aren't human like you. Isn't that the same as racism, the way it used to happen, or the way it still continues to happen with George Floyd, because you can kill somebody because of that? There are parallels there that are really strong, but you have to know your stuff in order to argue their case. We have to really have much more serious and diligent study to have these discussions, because we're teachers. We have to be teachers of each other, all right? And you can't teach somebody something you don't know.
And I definitely think that in the age of social media and like Twitter and having to get your thoughts off quickly and in a really limited amount of characters, that we're so used to like just doing things for outrage and sparking this outrage and just saying it quickly that, it's kind of looked down upon for those of us who say, okay, I need to do more research because I can't just come at this off the top of my head and then misspeak on a topic. I'm not, moving the conversation along any further than the person that I disagree with.
Actually, I think you're spot on with that. And I'm glad you told me that, because this is something I suspect this. So now that I'm going to treat you as the authority on this, because I think that this whole short sound bite prepackage everything for me, and there are no consequences once I say something, it's something that keeps us disempowered. it keeps us from seeing the big picture. All right. And in this country, there's all this talk about, oh, the far right is just terrible. Can't these people see what they're doing? They're doing the exact same thing that many people on the left are doing. It's super fast. Nobody's really thinking about the implications of their arguments and their positions. And that is a skill that is cultivated through critical thinking. We're drowning in information, but we're not drowning in really good questions that help us deal with that information. You see. So this is really one place for, organizing big time. This is why I love this project that you have, because I think it's devoted to dealing with those particular issues, even though you might not have seen it that way.
No, that is exactly how we went about it. There were things that I saw happening that I didn't agree with, and I'm like, I don't want to get caught up in a war of like battling with these other content creators. But if I realize maybe the theories or maybe the readings that help me build upon these theories aren't accessible, because I started reading the books that a lot of people that I looked up to intellectually would always quote, and it's like, A Voice from the South is maybe 126 pages, but it took me a year to get through that book. And so that was when we read it in the book club, we broke it into several parts and we produced video series around it, and we tried to do all these things because it's a very important text. But, I can't just quote that and then tell you to go read it, knowing that, like, outside of the classroom, it's an incredibly difficult book to read.
Can I encourage you, can I just encourage all of your listeners and viewers to write their own books? This is really important. The whole notion of there's a book out there, we just have to go find it. Certainly there are wonderful books already written. But I think there are so many people who have never thought of themselves as writing something longer than a tweet. And they have much more to say than that. And that gets you into terrain of how do you get things published. Now in Brazil, there's this wonderful Black woman feminist, Jamila, whose last name I cannot remember, who started a press so she could publish the works that were important to Black women in Brazil in little tiny books that they could afford and that they could buy and they could share with one another. And they could have. And that was her way of pushing back against the publishing houses that were denying publication opportunities to Black women. So if we all work in our own space, you see the same problem, but we problem solve it using our own talents and skills, we really come up with something quite wonderful and innovative. Right?
All right.
So take that energy.
No, we got it. You are the second author to come in here and tell us to write. Mickey Kendall was on
no
her case.
Kidding.
Yeah,
well,
we read her feminism, and Mickey was like, all y'all publishing deals. Yes. Okay. So, someone submitted a question letting us know that they are new to the theory of feminism, and this is particular to what's happening on YouTube. They frequently hear people associate being a feminist with a lack of femininity. So can you talk about why femininity and feminism are not mutually exclusive?
Okay, well, the whole bad rap on feminism from the media was that feminists were all not feminine. They were manly, they hated men, there was a certain image that was put out there as being a feminist. They're not married, they don't have any children, all of that kind of stuff. And what goes along with that, what gets swept up in that, is somehow they're not feminine like real women. Okay, well, let's start in the other place. Femininity is something that goes with masculinity, and it's tied to different cultures. So different cultures have different views of what is feminine and what is masculine, and then they enforce that. We happen to live in a culture where historically it's been really split. You're feminine if you like long hair, and if you make makeup and you have earrings, and all these trappings of femininity make you a feminine woman. Well, not really. The whole question of how you present yourself in terms of your personal style does not have to be wrapped up in this big discourse of femininity. I mean, you can be feminine in all kinds of ways and still be incredibly sexy. So can we just say that? Now, feminism is designed to give space to women to do that. It's designed to criticize those restrictive roles of femininity that would say, mainly to white women, we've inherited a lot of these basically I call them controlling images in my book, from the effort to create a form of femininity that keeps white women, and then a different form of femininity that keeps Black women subordinate or down. So looking for the power relations between, what we're taught in this country as the dominant discourse about masculinity, for example. You're a real man if you slap a woman and put her in line, kind of thing. Now, is that the kind of man we want, the kind of men we want to be with? Or you're a real woman if you just always agree with everybody, because that shows that you're not really that smart, and you don't want to really bother them with your intelligence or whatever, even though you're wearing a seriously hot outfit and you're smarter than they are. I mean, so there are all kinds of things we have to mix up and challenge. And that's my understanding of feminism at large. And Black feminism is takes a distinctive perspective or standpoint on all of that. All right. That includes race, includes class. It's holistic about how it looks at femininity. Now, I don't know if that helped the person.
No, that absolutely helps. But because you touch on what our next question leads into, which is because this is in your book, right? So in chapter 4, in Mammies, Matriarchs, and Other Controlling Images, you offer the reflection: race, gender, and sexuality converge on this issue of evaluating beauty. But African American women experience the pain of never being able to live up to extremely defined standards of beauty. Standards applied to us by white men, white women, Black men, and most painfully, one another.
Yeah.
So do hyperfeminine aesthetics, makeup, hair, nail extension, high heels, etc., pose a threat to the decolonization of mind and body, to the self-autonomy of Black women and femmes?
I think it depends on the individual Black woman. It's why you have all those things, why you're doing all those things. I will never tell anybody that personal expression is bad. You can't say that, all right? But I'll tell you one thing, I am much more of, that's what I would say there. But the whole notion of micromanaging other people's behavior as part of their politics is what we need to take a step back from. Because until you know why somebody is dressed the way they're dressed, doing what they're doing, and what it does for them, who are you to judge? Who made you the grand poobah of what Black women should or should not wear? That's how I look at it. At the same time, we also have to keep in mind that in this culture, what we wear and how we present ourselves is sending out signals to all kinds of people of who they think we are. So they feel they can treat us a certain way because of what we're wearing or because of how we look, all of that. And that is part of the whole history of Black women's abuse in this country. The fact of disrespecting the body politics and the body integrity of Black women and our bodies. So, it's a complicated issue. And it is hardest when you see Black women micromanaging each other, right? About, that girl. But, it's just like, okay, this is one of the things I know I'm going to keep talking about. And
I personally find it, we have a bunch of questions on this in this section, right?
Yeah.
Because I find it personally offensive to call other Black women masculine. If I'm not defining myself as masculine, you have no right as another Black woman to call me masculine as if that's a derogatory, in a derogatory manner on top of that. Like you're trying to put value of yourself over me. And that's what I really take issue with. It's like, look, you can have whatever, you can have however your personal appearance matters to you, whatever aesthetics you decide to feed into. But when you start saying you're more valuable than me because you perceive me as masculine, I find that to be a very painful and dangerous rhetoric.
I think there's got to be, what's nice about a lot of LGBT folk in coming out is that there is a confidence there that basically says, you know what, I'm going to turn this back on you. If you have a problem with how I look, or let's say I'm masculine or I'm butch, that's how I present myself, that's your problem. And let's just look at why that's your problem and how you feel that you are entitled to tell me about myself. This is really similar to when I was 14 years old walking to school in Philadelphia and a car would slow down and say $50 because they assumed that any young Black woman was eligible for prostitution and needed the money. So, there's a whole element of violation there that each of us needs to push back against to the best of our ability. keeping in mind that we are not all in the same situation or ability to do that. This is a form of vulnerability. So some of us will have to fight for others of us by what we write, by what we say, and basically put some protection. This is a protection question. I've been thinking about that one quite a bit that you asked me. So I don't know. I mean, I just want to say back off with all of that. It's not helpful. Put them on mind and actually make people defend their own positions if you can stand to listen to it. Because what will happen is they will run out of things to say very quickly. Because the shock value of shutting you down is what those kinds of assaults do. Yes. Right? But if you're confident enough and say, you know, I've been called that before. Why are you calling me that? Why is that important to you? What does that mean? You know, I mean, make them work. This is a teacher in me.
Make them sweat. Okay. So.
Make them think. This is the issue. Make them think. It's a teaching.
So, how can femininity be defined in a way that is understanding of the construction of gender, identity, roles, and norms?
To be honest with you, this is a question I just assume move on from. Because I think this is a really big question. It's like define femininity. I mean, if anything, this is the question of for now. I mean, this is the question the next generation has to take forward. What kind of femininity do we want? What kind of, for Black women, what kind of Black femininity do we want to see? All right. What kind of Black women do we want to become? How do we want to define femininity? Do we want it to be something where we're trying to catch a man so we get money? Do we want it to be femininity in such a way that everybody just thinks we're cute? Do we want to all be Beyonce? What is it going to be? Do we want to be Lizzo? I mean, it's sort of like there's a lot of space out there for thinking about femininity and reconstructing gender norms for both women and men. So I think this is the task for now. And I, for one, the reason I hesitated is I don't know the answer to that question. Because that's the question you've got to answer, readers or listeners out there or viewers. That's your question.
All right. I hope someone took a note of that. That's one of our pieces of homework.
Put that on the list.
Put it on the list. There we go. Okay. So this is we've seen this populate in the chat a few times about us asking about hypergamy, or marrying up, has been said to benefit Black women by maintaining or increasing her socioeconomic status. The disadvantages relate to societal views of hypergamy as gold digging and shallow. So is hypergamy an option for Black women professionals and academics? Does this practice uphold patriarchy? And does this practice negate the goals of Black feminism?
I just find this question very, very, I'm glad you raised it, because I just find this, what a question. That's what I wrote down when you sent me this question. Marriage is, if you think about marriage as being all about property and wealth, which is what it's been in the U.S. I mean, marriage is about inheritance. It's about having the right babies to inherit your property. It's about all of that. That's what gender has been all about, too. Women getting access to men's property as opposed to being their property. And this is a whole system that Black women have been outside of, because Black women were the property initially. And then later on, we're having children who could not be married into the wealth and had to marry Black men who were underpaid and who could not provide the wealth. So this whole notion of marrying yourself out of poverty, that is fundamentally an argument that's applied to Black poor people now, where you'll hear conservatives say, oh, the problem with Black people who are poor is they just all need to get married and have the traditional values that the rest of us have, and then they would be middle class like us. Why would we then take that kind of argument and say to professional Black women, maybe you can marry yourself out of working class status by finding yourself a rich man, a Black one or a white one, and you know you can't get a Black one because the Black ones are basically marrying the white ones. So you got to figure out how to get a white one for yourself if you want it. Why would we go through all of that? It seems like it would be better to start in a whole other place and say, do you want a happy and fulfilled life? Do you want someone to love you and you love them? I know you don't want to be poor. None of us wants to be poor. But how much is enough for you? And is marriage and status and chasing status through wealth going to provide you with the happiness that you think? Take a step back from that and ask yourself what you're doing as an individual to contribute to the collective good, both of children, of communities, of the country, of your own life. I find it very sad that people are going to be running around trying to find men with money, like all the sisters trying to marry the basketball players and the football players, all right, who were glorified on the housewives of wherever, Atlanta. It's really sad. That's how I look at it. So I think it's time to take a step back and say, that doesn't strike me as being Black feminist at all.
I mean, but I think their pushback is, one, I don't want to be a Black feminist, and two, I'm not invested in the community. I'm invested in the individual. And so my individual pursuit of comfort and success, I should be allowed.
Freedom. Their individual freedom came because of Black collective struggle. That's what they don't seem to understand. That whole personal space that you have to be an individual came from a long history of Black people who fought for your right to then turn your back and say, I don't feel like doing this. I don't feel like doing it. I'm not saying anybody has to be a Black feminist. I have never even talked about it that way as an identity category. I'm talking about it as a set of ideas, a set of principles, a set of behaviors, all those kinds of things. So yeah, this is not you picking this week you're going to be what. I mean, it just seems like these are people who may be lost to us. Let them go. Seriously, set them free. All right, maybe they'll write a check when they get money. Get them to write a check, and that's it. Don't argue with them. Take their money. All right? I hate to be that blunt about it because the need is so great. Why are we spending our time talking about this when we could be talking about all the Black girls who need lots of things? And who we can't say to them, you just need to find yourself a man to marry and marry yourself out of the hood. It's just ridiculous. Now, I didn't expect to say it that bluntly, but maybe that's what has to be said sometimes. I'm just going to invoke
shaking the table. Okay, right. I'm saying you're shaking the table, but we have a personal introspective question that says, I get love from my family, friends, and community, but that does not fulfill sexual desires. How do we divest in the inequitable forms of power perpetuated by patriarchy and heterosexuality while engaging with men intimately?
All right, I think the issue here is to not think about engaging with men intimately as being all wrapped up in all of that other stuff. There's a point at which you can just check all that at the door and look at a man as an individual and say, what kind of individual man? Oh, you know what? I've got stripes on my face. Hold it.
It's the golden hour. We were loving it, but you know.
All right. Sorry about that.
Thank you. It's okay. All
right. All of a sudden I realized I was sort of like, can't see here. It's a problem. I'm a rookie at this. I have not perfected my at-home space, etc. So the whole notion of we have forgotten how to actually look at people as people. The love of your life, the sexual love of your life, may not fit the categories that you're looking for. You see, I think sometimes it's really hard for women to see men as human beings like them. I noticed this when I was teaching when I was younger, and my Black male students were like, they were really could only see women sexually. This is an issue that younger women, I think, encounter that more mature women don't. When I got to a certain age, and this was like around 30, I discovered that my Black male students were coming in and talking to me very differently than they had before. They were very different people. They were much more vulnerable. They were much more open. They would ask questions. They didn't feel the need to posture. They didn't feel the need to perform this Black hypermasculinity. They were actually really nice people. The problem with this system that we're living in is not so much we're complicit in it. It's that we're carrying it around in us, and it's hindering our ability to see one another for who we are. So if you've got a Black man, he can't see, the only way he can see a Black woman is as a sexual partner, and she gets him because she's got a weave of some kind. This is just a commodity relationship that we don't need. All right. So I think that personal question saying, I need some kind of sexual, intimate relationship with people, and I've got to find ways to open myself up to that. And try and remember that the damage that was done to me in the past may not come in the next person. Why would we drag that baggage? And that's what we're all doing, because that's really the harm and the trauma of the kinds of situations that many of us are in. So that's what I would say.
Okay, can you just move, I think it might be to your right a little bit. Yeah, no, the
Better?
other way. The other way. A little bit, I don't know, maybe to the left? Because you're flipped.
What do you want me to do?
No, well, I'm no, you're fine. I'm saying I don't know what side it is because the way I see you, so I'm thinking it's.
What are you trying to eliminate? Tell me and I'll move that way. The
so
window?
No. Can you actually move the camera towards the window?
Sure. That way.
A little bit more. Yeah.
That way.
Okay, there. Yeah? You're more in frame. Okay, yeah. We were just cutting off your beautiful face. We wanted to see all of it in its glory.
Well, we certainly cannot have that.
No.
Nobody that on a daily basis, so I'm going to take it when I can get it.
We need the skincare regimen after this and everything, so we wanted to get it all in full frame.
Because I'm seriously senior. Yeah.
You look great,
okay.
though. Okay.
All righty.
So this is a very long question. So there's much conversation on social media encouraging Black women in various forms to divest from the labor of upholding a community. Now, in Chapter 2 on page 43, you address this when you reference I Do. And I think I Do is actually featured in Beyonce's new film. I Do? Yeah, she's same last name. I might be off. But I Do recognizes that neither African nor U.S. Black women nor any other group will ever be empowered in situations of social injustice. In a context of intersecting oppressions, Black feminism requires searching for justice, not only for U.S. Black women, but for everyone. So in this context, it sounds like social justice work that universalizes Black feminism is not autonomous. Is that the case? And if so, considering the value of autonomy, how can Black women practice or participate in social justice projects in such a way that they maintain autonomy, emphasize the particularities of Black feminism, and still prevent themselves from carrying the burden of doing the emotional work of nurturing others, whether they are in the oppressed group or the dominant group? That is a lot of a question, but it's very important. So.
No, but I think the issue is to parse out this question into the various parts, all right? So one part of this question is talking about emotional labor. And it's talking about Black women's historic roles in just so many places, and how do you actually prevent yourself from being exploited because you're the one that's been doing it. People keep coming back to you over and over again. That's one set of questions. That's a strategic question. The other set of questions have to do with how do you retain the particularity of Black feminism when it's in dialogue with other struggles, right? And that's the universal. So rather than thinking of universal as this big thing, we all just give up our particularities and run in there and just sort of hang out in a universal space of social justice. We need to begin thinking about social justice as something that is negotiated through dialogues with multiple groups. So for example, social justice for Indigenous folk in the U.S. will not be the same thing as social justice for Black people in the U.S. because these are very different histories. And yet both of us can be committed to this common goal of making this society more just for each other and for more people than that. Now that's a very different way of thinking about the big category of social justice as this set of principles that we all must kind of adhere to, like it's the Bible, all right, like it's the theology, and then we just buy into it and then we all lock hands and forget about how we're different because we're all human. That's the Western discourse of humanity. I'm arguing something a little different. You get to humanity if you go through particularities. All right, so that's one whole set of issues. Coming back to Black women and the question of exploitate. See this one, I wish she had asked this one a little differently. You cannot give somebody something you don't have to give. That's it in a nutshell. So this Black women being rewarded for being the strong Black woman, for being the woman who's always there, who's holding up the family, that can also be something that is exploited, right? And it can be exploited by people who love you, but they're still exploiting you because they're asking things of you that they would not do for you. All right. There's another question that has to do with divisiveness in terms of Black feminism and Black men. The whole notion of holding people accountable for doing more things for Black women and Black women continuing to do as much as they want to do what they've done for communities and families. Recognizing that emotional labor is part of why we have these disparate health, why we have these health disparities, why you got Black women dying younger of things that they shouldn't have, because that whole situation, it just wears you down. All right. So that would not have been one of my best answers, but that was a really big and complicated question. So hopefully that began to just dig into that question, the layers of that question.
Yeah, but I think it's really important that you say, the way in which we so when Dr. Brittany Cooper also came and did an author chat on her book, Eloquent Rave, right? And she made the comment that we need to celebrate ourselves more. That as Black women, we're trained to only celebrate ourselves for marriage, giving birth, maybe graduating school or getting a new job, kind of. But we have very few societal points which we feel like are built in to celebrate ourselves. And so, when we think of other ways in which we celebrate it, like this Black girl magic and the carefree Black girl, and the ways in which those themes, even like strong Black woman at some point in time, has been celebrated. And as you said, that the same way we can be celebrated can be exploited and, cause more harm, and constantly, whether it asks Black women to fit into a very binary understanding of themselves, whether it asks Black women to take on a burden that they can't uphold themselves without the reciprocity of care. We're also reading pleasure activism after this. So, all these things that run congruent to this.
I think it's easier to see these relationships if you see them in the workplace, because we're prepared to think about the ways in which we're exploited in the workplace. So, I would say, listen, you pay me for one job, I'm doing one job. I'm not doing two jobs for one paycheck. And I'm definitely not doing three jobs for one paycheck. And the second job would be all the emotional care and labor of dealing with the damage done to other Black people because they are really, the university doesn't want to pay for somebody to actually deal with that. Or somebody that says, but you're the only one who can do this and be on this committee because you have the perspective about race and class and gender, and nobody else has that perspective. And I want to say, why not? Why do people have that perspective? Why does it have to be me, kind of thing? So the whole notion of working you to death, and you see the need, all right? But the exploitation is clearer in the university when I use the whole notion of one job, one paycheck, even though obviously we all end up doing more than that. But the point is, if you didn't have that kind of framework, you would just be eaten alive, you see. So, but in the context of families and communities, where it's expected of us to do all of that, I think it's much harder to say no. And that is what is hard. See, Brittany talks about celebration. I think the skill we need to develop is the skill of saying no, right? It's a little tiny word, N-O, 2 letters, all right? Practice all the inflections. No, 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 no. I mean, there are plenty of ways of doing this, if you got to go home and practice. But that is the magic word. I'll get back to you tomorrow, next day. I thought about it. The answer is going to have to be no. Whatever. That is much easier to do in professional employment situations than in our own families and in our communities and in churches for people who do go to church and things like that. So, yeah. Because they'll celebrate your exploitation, by the way. They'll throw a party for you when you're too tired to enjoy yourself.
Oh, wow. This is true.
Celebration to me is you got to be careful with the celebration.
Oh, man. Okay, yeah, you have to set a boundary and really uphold it.
Absolutely. Then we can celebrate. I'm all for celebrating.
And so in response to the violence that Black women and girls have been facing, but is now being publicized through the social media, there has been a recent outcry to protect Black women and girls, but not a lot of guidance around what protection means. So, how would Black feminism define protecting Black women and girls? Also, following a Black feminist framework, how can non-Black women and girls, and also Black women and girls who aren't already doing so, go about protecting each other?
Violence comes from so many different places. It comes from the individual. So the question is how to protect Black girls from the individuals in their lives who may be related to them, who may be on their block. I mean, how do you actually intervene with that? And that is really the difficult question people don't want to think about, because that way we have to really think about people around us as being wonderful some days and not so wonderful other days. Children are the most vulnerable people in this culture, and girls are especially vulnerable, but also boys. Protection really would be nice if we had a way to pressure the institutions that should be protecting girls, but in fact are not, and they're contributing to their vulnerability. And that would be, there's a wonderful book, I think, called Push Out. It's a young woman who's written a book about girls and how they're disciplined in schools and who are pushed out. And schools' inability to recognize the kinds of things that are happening to girls who are in foster care or the criminal justice system, juvenile justice. We have policies that are extremely bad for girls, all right? I wouldn't want anything to be defined as protection that would get us back to, we must go back to protecting our girls the way we used to. Lock them up, keep them home, make sure they don't go out, tell them to manage their behavior so they don't call attention to themselves, hide themselves, all of that, all in the sort of the guise of protecting them. If anything, we might want to teach them how to protect themselves more often by speaking out, by providing opportunities for that. There's just so much work to be done in this particular area. It's not about just protecting your own child. It's protecting the community's children as if they are your own children. This is why I just, blew up a few minutes ago with the selfishness of the narcissism of the, I'm going to marry up for money because that's what I'm going to do for me. I mean, that is really such a bankrupt philosophy when it comes to, you're looking at a genuine social need here. And you've got people with talents and resources and skills who really can do something more than they're apparently doing. So, and then of course the question was, what about the people who are not Black? Well, obviously this is much bigger than Black people to solve. All right. There are many, many white women that have Black children. That is something we have to really think about and respect that. And they tend to be the ones who get radicalized first, when they recognize that their child really is treated differently than everybody else, and their daughter is going to be treated differently than everybody else. So this is something where it has to be a bigger effort than just Black people. But if Black people are not in front of the line on this, it's not going to happen.
Well, related to the last question, in what ways have and do you practice restorative justice through a Black feminist mindset?
Well, I don't know if those are the exact words I would choose. Restorative justice really means putting things back the way they were initially, restoring people to health, restoring people to, before the violation. Reparative justice is the reparations. That's the whole notion of you compensate people for the harm that was done to them, but you don't have the expectation that you're going to fix anything. All right. So restorative justice is a much bigger concept, and it's much harder to do because you have to imagine how you would restore the life that Black women would have lived before racism, sexism, all these kinds of things. Indigenous people really have a pretty good sense of restorative justice because their thinking is land-based. So they can say things like there's a uranium mine that's polluted the land that was our ancestral land. Restorative justice involves getting rid of the uranium mine and doing everything you can to make that land as habitable as it was before. That's a really concrete example of restorative justice. So to ask that question about social relations and around Black women and around Black feminism, I just think that I would have to leave that to others who really are experts in this to answer that one a little better than I just did.
I'm muted again. Sorry, y'all. So I be forgetting to take myself off mute. So worried about this echo. But for the next question, we are going to bring in a member of the syllabi cohort because I do not run this book club by myself. It is not all me. We have a cohort of postgraduate Black women who help make all the readings more accessible. And so one of those members is Dr. Nicole Carter, and she's going to come in and ask the next question. And I'm going to take myself out just for the minute, so y'all got this. Yeah, I can go right ahead and handle it. You can go ahead and ask.
Okay. So hello again.
Hello.
So this question was submitted by one of our members, one of the book club members, and I really liked it. And so this is why I chose to ask it, because I'm interested in hip hop feminism and these ideas of sexual freedom and things like that. So in chapter 7, you discuss how some heterosexual Black women deem Black lesbians and openly sensual, sexually free Black women as traitors to the race. However, today, many women, rappers such as Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, you brought up Lizzo, right, are celebrated for their openness.
Yeah.
What do you believe to be the reason for this shift, or do you believe that there is a shift at all?
I think there's been a shift, and I, for one, am very, very happy to see this shift, because there is so much more space now to be a Black woman who's comfortable in her body than there was 40 years ago. I mean, when you look at the social movements of the past, you realize that, it was dangerous. This country it's dangerous now, but it was very dangerous if you were in the wrong place, in the wrong clothes, doing the wrong thing. This is why that politics of respectability was so important. It was a shield to protect young Black women and Black women in general from these types of assaults. That's where that came from. It was fear for each other, all right, or fear for oneself if those images were, if you were performing those images for a dominant population. I think we're in a whole different place now. I think we can tell the difference between pop culture. We can tell I hope we can tell the difference between someone who's performing, who's putting on a show, who's really entertaining us, and people who really believe the hype and they really are like that. All right. So I'm fine with it. I just think it's kind of outrageous, and I think it's important, and I'm glad to see it. And I think what we need is a discussion that is appropriate for today of what that all means. So what sense should I make of Nicki Minaj? I was introduced to Nicki Minaj by my students. I'm teaching away in my little class and blah, 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 blah. And they said, Dr. Collins, do you know who Nicki Minaj is? And I said, well, no, I don't. They said, we'll put her on, because we had the classroom was all hooked up with a great big gigantic screen. And next thing I knew, there was Nicki performing away. There was like, my jaw dropped, because there we were in this space thinking about, there she is, and I don't know what to think about this. So I think this, again, is one of those questions. I can frame out the questions that I think are important to ask around questions of power, image, how they work together, personal freedom, as I've described it. But it is not for us, or for me, any one person, to say what that should be. So you can teach me what is harmful, what is helpful, and what you think about that. Those are the kinds of discussions that need to happen.
Thank you for answering the question. I actually do think that it is deeply connected to what you and Julie have been talking about, the politics of respectability and things like that.
Yeah.
Question sexuality and sexual freedom. So I appreciate your answer.
Because I do feel we're in another place, and I think it's a better place because there's more space for more people and more ideas, and that's always going to be good. All right, rather than 2 or 3 people calling the shots and we just bow down to them, whoever they may be. All right, but that doesn't mean that because there's more space and there's more voices and there are more people that it's just inherently going to be good, because there are some bona fide serious threats that we face because of this stuff. All right, because of, so I just, it's just these times are great. It's the only way to sum it up. This is I mean, it's a terrible time in terms of things that are happening globally, but I just think that it's wonderful in terms of what's happening with information and sort of the next, what I call next generation. I'm doing work on intergenerational work now, intergenerational connections in terms of political issues, and this is just this is a very interesting generation. So I just think we'll see what they do. I don't know if you're in it. Maybe not. You know, when you slice it, you get up one day and you say, I don't think I'm in that generation anymore. You know, that could be a bit unnerving, but anyhow, yeah.
All right, I'm gonna take Nicole out now, and now we're swapped. Let me see if I can. Oh, let's try this.
Neither one of you has moved for me, so this is all working extremely well.
No, we moved on. I just want to move us back around. All right, so the next question. Oh, and thank you, Nicole, for chiming in. We wish we could have got more of the cohort to come in, but everyone's going through transitions. It's a rough year for all of us, so we get who we can get in. But chapter 11 discusses knowledge validation processes controlled by elite white men within Western institutions. So how have Black women inside and outside of the academy created new ways of validating their own experience, histories, and knowledge? I wanted to pluralize that.
I still think it's an uphill battle inside the academy, because I just think that, be perfectly frank, I hate to sort of personalize this like white men, but the point is, you just have to wait for them to leave. It's the only way to sum it up, and to hope. It's very slow. I mean, I tell people, I got this job at the University of Maryland as a social theorist. I was very happy to get this job. There are very few of them, but the person who had the job before me did pass away. So that is kind of how things work in the academy sometimes. Or you replace people with people just like you, if you can possibly do that. Now, but I think, having said that, I think there's been a lot of headway that's been made in the academy around changing the rules of what is considered to be credible scholarship and who we should listen to. A lot of us have fought very hard for that. And I think we're seeing success, but it's grudging success. I don't necessarily think the most creative work and innovative work is going to come from the academy in terms of Black feminism. I just don't think it's there. And when people say to me, oh, I'm thinking of entering a doctoral program, I want to say, well, listen, we need you, but you do realize this is going to be 5 to 7 years of doctoral work. It's going to be 5 years if you can find a tenured position. It's going to take a while. This is a long game. All right. And some people are really well suited to that, and they should definitely do it. But along the way, they may lose or forget why they were doing it in the first place. And that's the whole notion of sort of the creativity and the innovation that Black feminism needs. I think some of the most interesting and important Black feminist work is being done in cultural politics. I'm a real fan of Black women filmmakers. And all the ways in which Black women who are making films, working in television, writing scripts, all of that are changing the discourse about a lot of things. And it doesn't have to be the political speech on the stump where you get up and you try and convince people to change their wicked ways. You can just change their wicked ways by what you write and what they see. For example, I have 2 young grandchildren, so I've seen a fair amount of animated children's movies, which is not something I would normally do. But I am really amazed at what's going on there in terms of multicultural discussion. All right. Even though they don't look at it that way, they're just being entertained. So I think when I look at Black feminism and sort of the places for personal expression and innovation, I'm very impressed by the poets. I don't read poetry, I don't write poetry, but the poets are amazing. When I was in Brazil, there was this woman who was called an Insta poet. I guess you've heard of this, all right? I had never heard of an Insta poet, but this woman got up and she had a room easily of, I'd say about 600-700 people, and they were all young people. They were young Black people, and they came to hear her read her poetry. And she said, I started with Instagram, but then I published my poetry in a book of poetry. So it was a reverse. It wasn't like you had to go to the gatekeeping organizations to publish your work and then market it through Instagram. It was, you can create the work through these outlets and then find ways to take it to the next step. And And that is a way of keeping freshness of ideas and heterogeneity in the work itself. Now, I raise this because this is not the kind of work that I do. It's really important that you do it so that I can read it, so I can find it, so I can promote it, so I can tell people how wonderful it is. That's my job, all right? So, but I have to know where to look, right? And, all right, so that's what I would say about that. But, the big picture.
No, that's interesting. I actually applied for my PhD in history last year, and I was trying to work under Dr. Rhonda Williams, who's at Vanderbilt. And so when I met her, and we sat down and talked, she's like, look, if you don't get in, it really has nothing to do with you. And she's like, some of the most important work being done around Black women history is being done by women in local communities.
Did she say that?
Yes, that's exactly what she told me. She looked at me, she's like, girl, they might not let you, and I didn't get in, so it's okay. But
you have to be really dedicated that you're going to want to change those institutions. I think people really underestimate the sort of the persistence that it takes to always be pushing back in the academy. It's similar to people in politics who are always running for office and they're in the government and you can't understand how they can stand it, but they have to do it all the time. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing, but it's worth it for those who really say this is something that I'm going to do. But the thing is, now we have options that didn't exist before. Now, I don't know if they are paying options. I suppose if that's a situation, you might not need to find yourself a wealthy man so that you can engage in your to fund your independent Black feminist project. I don't know. I mean, this is but the times have definitely changed. These entrepreneurial sisters are very interesting to me. That's a whole other thing. Who's going to fund all this stuff? All right.
That is a good question. All right. Yeah. So in chapter 11, we have quite a few questions because chapter 11 was one of our featured chapters for the read. So again, another question in chapter 11, you discuss the 1896 ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson by building upon Kimberly Crenshaw and her comments about it promoting a rhetoric of color blindness. How can we transform this rhetoric by encouraging white people and others who subscribe to the notion of color blindness to understand intersectional oppression?
When I read that question initially, and we're well into the interview now, so I don't really want to dwell on this particular question, but I think there are people who do a very good job of dealing with color blindness in white people. Eduardo Bonilla Silva, whose work on white supremacy he's just been doing this for a while. I can name quite a few people. I have never been particularly good at trying to get white people to change their ways. I'm very good at working with people who are already there in terms of that teachable moment. So this question about how to get intersectionality into a colorblind rhetoric or to replace it is it's important in some situations, but it's not particularly my question. So I think I want to move on from that one.
It's always good to say when there are other people who are more capable.
Absolutely.
Of giving a productive answer to a question.
Well, you have to know what you're good at and what you're not good at, and you can't. Often when you get an expert, they talk as if they know everything about everything, and they don't. So sometimes it's good for people to say, "I don't know," or "I'm choosing not to do that."
Yes, I love it. I love it when people have that awareness. So again, in chapter 11, you reference the use of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims as a characteristic of Black feminist epistemology. To me, dialogue has been one of the tenets upon which SBG book club sits, and a phenomenal one. This is not me saying this is what somebody submitted, so thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that y'all see what we're doing here. Thank you. I love you all too. So are there other characteristics that come to mind connected to this epistemology which would help ensure or remind members of the SBG book club of the importance of constructing knowledge and enacting change?
There are, but I am not going to dwell on those. Here's the situation. I last year published a book called Intersectionality as Critical Social Theory. And it's a pretty heavy-duty book. It's written to try and push back in academia all of the ways that intersectionality is going to be defined as being something that it's not, to strip it of its political power. So that was the intent of that particular book. And I spend a lot of time in that book talking about dialogical engagement, which is exactly what you're doing, which is a methodology. And the question of intersectionality is talking about intersections of systems of power. So this whole question of what kind of dialogues can you have about, from the perspective of race and gender to each other. There's so many ways that we can construct knowledge through dialogue. But dialogues are often across differences in power. And people think they're having a friendly conversation and they're just sharing ideas. But what's actually happening in a lot of our dialogues is power is operating as well, in terms of who's talking, who's listening, how much, what kind. So rather than, I would want to spend time on really doing a deep dive into this notion of biological engagement and how it's the way we can move forward in this world we're in now. Whether it's in a community organization, and you have to figure out how to get the LGBT people and the heterosexist black man to work together because they have to have a dialogue in order to have a common political agenda. Or if you're talking about an academic meeting that is really looking theoretically at how these systems go together. Or if you're having a dialogue where you've got people who want to know stuff and they need dialogues with people who are going to help them organize it, like this wonderful smart black girl book club, brown girl book club. It's so many different ways that this question of dialogue replaces what we currently have, which is hierarchy and one-way conversation. Those at the top, a few at the top, tell everybody else what to think and do. No dialogue. They put fake dialogues in there so you think you contributed. But that's fake stuff. To have genuine dialogues takes work, and that's building community capacity. So I've been talking about this throughout this entire interview. So this just seems like waiting for this question because I thought, yay, all right, it's a good one.
Thank you. So the next question actually also touches on this. So in discussing Black feminism as that which is collaborative and based upon dialogue, are there hierarchies among Black women and between Black women, as well as other groups that might arise during these collaborative efforts? And so, how can these hierarchies be circumvented during collaboration and dialogue to reach the goals of Black feminism?
I guess my answer might surprise you. I don't think they can be circumvented. I think they're real. And I think the issue is how you deal with real differences across power. And sometimes there will be conflict, sometimes there will be consensus. But I think the issue is we all make our contributions in the ways that we can. I can do things you can't do, and you can do things I can't do. And if we have to work on a common project and there's going to be a hierarchy, we have to send who is best at what needs being done. So the hierarchy is not permanent. It would be a skills-based hierarchy. It would be, that's what it means to work in community organizing. So a lot of now, while we've got all the space for personal expression and individuality, what it's tended to do, unfortunately, is make us neglect the skill set of contributing to the public good. That certainly is the case in the country that we're living in, which is not the case in other countries. It doesn't have to be this way. That can be a problem, that whole mindset, if you have a whole room full of Black people or Black women who all want to be the queen. It's just not going to work, all right? So this whole notion of in my work, I've introduced this notion of flexible solidarity. It's like you're solid, the solidarity occurs around a shared agenda. But solidarity doesn't mean that the women always are quiet and the men run things. That's the kind of old-fashioned ideological solidarity we had. Flexible solidarity reconfigures itself in relation to the task at hand. All right, so you're always in solidarity with people, but it's not always going to look the same way because it's in a different social setting. And I think I can defend this idea as being quite old in Black feminism historically. I think this is what those savvy Black feminists did, Black women did, in terms of not calling themselves feminists until the moment was right, until there was a movement, or not coming out around certain issues because the time wasn't right. There was a flexible solidarity around now is the time. Let's push for this. Enough of that. So, it's always going to be conflict there. But I don't think it's going to necessarily be solved by coming up with an answer we can all say, let's just all just get along.
Well, I think we also have to acknowledge we're imperfect human beings.
Absolutely.
And, we live in like, as much as we would like to divest from the capitalistic society, we still live within a capitalistic society. And so there's a replication of hierarchies consistent throughout society. And as long as you take on a level of self-awareness and humility and how you approach, and integrity in how you approach the work.
Well, it's really interesting that people are always talking about how white people should use their privilege to help Black people. But within Black communities, we don't talk about how you should use your class privilege to help less fortunate Black people, or use male privilege to help women, or use heterosexual privilege. I mean, we sort of, that argument kind of disappears at the boundaries, as Kathy Cohen would say, the boundaries of Blackness. All right. So it's there's work to be done, but there is no choice but to be at the front of the line to do this work, because this is a country that fundamentally must have Black people and Native people, Indigenous people on the bottom, or doesn't know who it is. All this pushback against sort of icons. I mean, the fact that the quote Redskins are no longer going to be that anymore. This is fascinating. We're in a period of time in terms of just a little bit of cracking of the system. So we'll see what comes out of this.
Yes, it's an exciting time. We are getting towards the end. Thank you for all your time. We're in the field goal.
I'm running out of water, so we can only go so far. All right.
I hope everyone is enjoying this. We've kept a very steady audience though too. People have not logged off in this past 2 hours. So thank you, people. You have been very riveting. And all right. So the bigger picture and closing out. So in reference to chapter 12. Someone says that they have begun the long process of executing a dialectical approach to resisting oppression with their Black Caribbean parents. The process has consisted of them moving from discussing their interests in social justice as being negative to extending time considering the lives of those who oppress, such as the police, male rapists, etc., in place of the lives of the oppressed. So they want to know, what has been your process of engaging with people who reside in the crossover space of family and individuals who do not see Black women as worthwhile, and when should I give up? This is real for a lot of us, though, because
it's an interesting question, because my style is not what people think my style is. Somebody once called me a ninja. I do Tai Chi, and there's this whole notion that when you see a force coming at you, your first notion is to resist it and fight it. But, one principle of martial arts is very much moving out of the way. You dissipate the force because they're coming at you someplace where you no longer are. All right. So it's like staying ahead of them and moving. So this whole style of, I'm not confrontational with my family members. When they say things to me or have said things to me about beliefs that they had, and I just thought, oh, that's just simply wrong. I don't start wagging my professor finger and really arguing with them. It's more like, let me go off and think about how I can come back at this another way, and where they may not see me coming. Well, let that energy just go past, but I'm going to remember that I have a list of all the things I've heard and listened to. But I will say this, you never give up on your family. You can leave them alone for a really long time and decide, I can't stand these people because they're harmful to me. But it is interesting how family members, not all, but they'll come around. This is another time issue. It's like you just keep checking back over and over and over again. And as time passes and you change, they change too. the whole notion of everybody stays the same except you, and you're the one having all this amazing personal growth, is erroneous. All right. So I think some of those family arguments, this is the way I am. I hate to lose an argument. I will argue with you to the death. That's why I try and avoid them. And I hate being wrong. But when I go home, I have to think, you know what? I might have been wrong. I'm not sure. I need to research this a bit more. And I think a lot of those heated arguments where people really care about each other tend to be like that. Nobody wants to lose face, all right, while it's going on. So I think the process of knowing that you're going to be linked with people forever, that you can't turn them back in. You can't trade in your mother or whatever and say, I don't like this one, give me another one. It doesn't work that way. All right, I hate this grad program, I'm going to another one. Doesn't work that way. Gives us a certain way of thinking about our connections to community, to family and community, and to the long struggle, the long arc of the struggle. So I would say to this person, I know you must have some of those people who get on your last good nerve. That's what it's called. You just got on my last good nerve. But you keep going back. Maybe not the next day, but you always go back.
We give people the space and grace to grow on their own time.
Absolutely.
And so you don't always have to say things expecting a reaction. Sometimes you just have to, communicate to them in the language they understand, and then leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
And let it be
respecting.
what it is.
Yeah.
That is what it is. And so, as it relates to our larger society, though, what does dismantling the matrix of domination look like in 2020 and beyond, with the political polarization and the rise of the far right and left? This is building upon, a theory that's discussed in chapter 11 and 12 of your book.
At this point, not only is this pretty foreign to the interview, but I just think we're at a historic moment where it is really hard to predict. This is where my thinking is. 2020, we've had a pandemic, we've had a global meltdown of the global economy, and we've had a global social movement under the heading of Black Lives Matter that I never would have seen coming, that was going to be multicultural the way it's turned out to be and global. We've had three big things happen in 2020, and there's more of 2020 to come, okay? We need to make it to the selection. We need to see what happens with the selection. And then for me, I will have the last piece of information that I need to think about now. Let's think about 2021. That doesn't mean we don't prepare for 2021 and beyond. But if the process is one of continuing to kind of push for social justice and through various strategies, we recalibrate the strategies based on what the next phase looks like. And I see lots of strategies, but I think right now, that's just, we need to catch our breath and figure out what we're dealing with. That's how this feels to me.
Yeah, it's so hard to make any decisions right now, any permanent decisions. Yeah. Because there's so much uncertainty happening.
Absolutely. We do, but we also have to keep in mind that we will be making the beyond. So it's not like it's gonna happen with your input or not. All right. So it's a question of, I've been approaching this as preparation. What can I do now to prepare, to be nimble, to go in a variety of directions depending on what actually happens?
So we got a ton of questions to enter into our second to last question about applying for graduate degrees and PhD programs. And do you have any advice for those seeking postgraduate degrees? We also got a ton of questions about finding a mentor in this space. And I'll chime in here first, though, for the mentor thing, and why we didn't explicitly put that question in here is because we realize there's not a lot of Black women in various spaces, especially at the higher level. The higher up you go, the fewer of us there are. And so we always counsel our community to, look to those who you have direct access with and build like a board of directors. Like a board of people who you can look to for advice, rather than seeking that one individual who you want to invest this large amount of labor into to mentor you, because that access doesn't exist for a lot of us.
I kind of come at this another way. I think that the most important thing is to be passionate about what you want to go to graduate school to do. And then the question of how you figure out how to do it and which graduate school to go to. And it becomes a question of strategy. What are the best strategies to pursue to keep that idea alive, to write that dissertation that you want to write? And if you can't write it as a dissertation, to prepare while you're a doctoral student so you can write it after you get out and you have that doctorate. So, but if you're not passionate about whatever it is you are interested in or care about, this has to be really there. You cannot teach people passion. You can't make them. You can teach people how to be disciplined in graduate school. You can mentor them how to pick good courses. You can show them the ropes of how publishing goes. All this you can get those kinds of skills from many different kinds of people. And to say you got to find a Black woman mentor to do that is completely unrealistic. And all the things I've been talking about today are, speak to that. And I think a lot of Black graduate students, in particular Black women graduate students, expect that kind of relationship with their Black female mentor, because they really think that she should understand everything that's going on in my life. And it's not a reciprocal relationship at all. It is often I am a child, help me relationship. And one way you become stronger and adult is you get a skill set, but you know why you're doing it. And nobody else can give you that. That's something you need to think about, because this is not an easy thing to do. It's also expensive, and there's all kinds of outrage along the way. And if you are not committed to institutional change of the academy, and doctoral programs are very much preparing people for faculty positions that do not exist right now, by the way. All right, let's also think about that aspect of the whole thing. So, but I think, having said that, all those caveats, the person who is really says, listen, I need this degree for what I need to do for whatever I want to write about or whatever I want to create, or, on my performance studies degree, whatever it is, you've got to do it, even if it's painful. That's what I would say to that. I think it is a real problem that institutions have sold all graduate students this apprenticeship model of how you learn how to do this. It's a family model. It's like, if you're in a good family, you have a mommy and a daddy, and they provide for you, and they tell you what to do, and you copy them. And I think that's a particularly pernicious model for Black people and Black women and women of color or people of color, who should not be copying every Black person just because they're Black. This is kind of mindless. The issue is to really look at who you can trust and who believes in your project, even if they don't know anything about it. Some of the best advisors are the people you are teaching things, and they are responsive to that. It's more of a reciprocal relationship, and everybody's empowered. So I think we really do have to be careful, because the universities love this whole mentoring advice. You will be a failure if you don't have a mentor. And if there is a failure, it's the student's fault, or it was the mentor's fault. And I just think it's more complicated than that. So I like your whole idea of putting together your board of directors, or I think of it as parallel mentoring. You find people in your social network who all know how to do things that you don't know how to do, and you know how to do things they don't know how to do, and you share. This is a dialogical engagement again. This is how I had to do this. There were no mentors. So what am I supposed to do? Like, just sit home until some Black woman gets tenure? So it's just like, no. I mean, this is kind of what desegregating the institution is all about, all right? And the resegregation of the institutions, if we're not careful. Same thing that's happening in our public schools. All right. So you didn't hear me say don't do it. I didn't say that, right? No, I did not say that. But I said be really smart about how you do it, and you have to know yourself and why you're doing it. It can't just be, this is the natural next step for me, or I thought a law degree would really help me in my whatever. You just have to do your homework. Yes. All right?
So we have our very last question. This is it. We are at the end of the road. Who are some of the Black women thinkers and theorists you find to have compelling works? And are there current scholars that you see as torchbearers for Black feminist thought?
The problem here is that this is not the way I think about things, right? This is just like, these kinds of questions always just stop me in my tracks. Obviously, you had Brittany Cooper on, who to me would be a torchbearer and who would be amazing, and I hope she can keep it up. But the whole notion of I'm a torchbearer and I'm going to get out in front and lobby for this thing is kind of it sounds very much like a political campaign. All right. Now, I think people who move the entire project forward, I think more collaboratively, what contributions are they making to Black feminism as a collective endeavor? And those people are often not famous. All right, so that's kind of why I'm stopped in my tracks, because there are wonderful people who are very good. I can think of a lot of people, but I wouldn't say that there's kind of the it girl or the it woman who's going to be the Black feminist that we should all just like whatever. So that's just never been my style. And that's why I think I'm always interested in investigating and promoting new talent to the best of my ability. Some of the best things that you can do not have your name on them at all. So if somebody has her name all over everything, I'm beginning to say, what's happening? Was she elevated by other people? Did she seek that out? What's going on with that? And it's a variety of things. But some of the best, person who told you this at Vanderbilt, I think some of the best work is being done by ordinary, average people. And the issue is we have to be in touch with them to know that, all right? The torchbearers for Black feminism, this is what I would say. One recent experience. When I was in Sao Paulo in Brazil, I got to go to a Black women's quilombo. And a quilombo is that safe space, that maroonage space, the space where Black women create a structure just for them. And that room was full of every kind of Black, it was amazing. And the ideas that were there, ordinary people, people with doctorates, the whole deal. It was just, oh gosh, it was just like, this is what we need. And I couldn't even tell you the names of the people without getting out a book and sort of looking up my own notes about who was there. So this Western notion of naming is we don't, it's nice, you got to do it, but it's just not the way I think about things. So I'm going to struggle with that question. All right.
Before we close out completely, I do want to plug, we are raising funds for our video project. So if you've enjoyed this chat, please donate, smartbrowngirl.com/donate, because we want to make some of these academic reads more accessible and provide a political education across, the accessibility playing field. So thank you, Dr. Collins, for joining the book club. The live chat on the side of my screen has been going off this entire time. Everyone has been, we've been in church. We've greatly enjoyed this. We really appreciate you coming and speaking with us. And we greatly appreciate the work that you have put out into this world and how much we can learn from it, and your own commitment to the community and how we can mirror the things that you discuss and, the labor of putting this theory and thought into practice. So thank you.
Well, and also there are people who are listening and who are watching who can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. I have said this at least 3 times in this conversation, making a list, who are,
I hope someone has that list together. Yes.
All of that, whatever it is, doesn't have to be write a book, but the fact that that's how it gets carried forward, and hopefully having some sense of what's a good way to go about it in terms of how you talk and listen to other people and how we work with each other. We can have, I'm very opinionated. I'm sure you can get a sense of that, but
no, we love it. We love it.
People, whole notion of being respectful in how we work with them. This is the whole thing of being a teacher, the pedagogical nature of this work is really important. Accessibility is pedagogy. We don't need theory where we have no idea what it is, and because it's not written for us or about us. It's about us, but it's not for us.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to keep doing what I do. And I think you should keep doing what you do. I don't usually accept invitations like this. Yes. But you just...
Oh, man.
You did. It was good. I said, I think I should do this one. Okay.
We try to be mindful. We try to be concise and to the point. Be like, look, this is what we about. This is what we're doing.
You did a wonderful job.
Okay. This is what we need. Thank you. But so thank you to everyone who submitted questions. There is no way we could have did this live chat without the community of questions. This was not my doing. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate the engagement and the involvement of the community. So we're going to end here. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much. Stay in touch.